There is a secret known to every great conqueror of his own mind, a secret not written in the sky or whispered in shadows, but forged in the furnace of routine, one habit. One deliberate, unwavering act performed daily at the same time, with the same purpose, until it bends your brain into a mold of unbreakable discipline. The man who discovers this truth, who commits to it with no room for excuse, will no longer be bound by the invisible chains of delay and indecision. He becomes a force, not because he was born that way, but because he built himself that way. And it all begins with definiteness of daily command. Your mind, left ungoverned, is a kingdom overthrown. It rebels not through noise, but through subtlety, distractions dressed as urgencies, temptations disguised as rest, comforts masquerading as kindness. Yet when you rise each morning and perform one habit at the same hour, without variation, you seize back the throne from this rebellion. You declare, this is the law, this is the act, this is the time. And from that declaration forward, every fiber of your mind begins to align with that law. Your thoughts no longer wander like aimless travelers. They follow a path you've paved through intent and repetition. The man who builds this single habit into his life has taken the first step towards sovereignty over his own impulses. For discipline is not found in the extremes. It is not born of occasional motivation or erratic effort. It is created in the ordinary, in the decision to act without negotiation, in the doing of one thing that matters more than any fleeting emotion. This is definiteness of daily command, choosing a single purposeful action, committing to it at a precise hour, and executing it whether you feel like it or not. The brain begins to understand when you mean business. It obeys what you do more than what you say. Every time you delay, postpone, or excuse, you whisper to your mind, you are the master, I am the slave. But when you act, especially when you act with predictability and purpose, you reverse that relationship. You remind your subconscious that it exists to serve, not to steer. One action, done with devotion and consistency, becomes a flag planted in the terrain of your day. And once you've claimed that territory, the rest of the day must march behind it. Let this habit be the first thing you do before the world lays its hands on your mind, before the noise of others' priorities pollute your focus, before distractions dress themselves in duty. It does not matter if the habit is writing 1 page, meditating for 10 minutes, exercising for 20, or planning your goals in silence. What matters is that it is done early, done without delay. Done at the same time until time itself begins to serve you, until your inner voice stops arguing and starts obeying. Do not underestimate the power of one habit because it is small. The avalanche begins with a snowflake. The earthquake begins with a shift you cannot see. So does discipline. It begins with one act you think is too small to matter. But the size is not the secret. The secret is in the certainty, the exactness. The refusal to bargain. For when you perform the habit the same way, at the same time, with the same energy, you build a neurological pathway of strength. And the man who has such a pathway becomes unshakable. But more than that, far more than that, you are not only building a habit, you are sending a message to the deepest part of your mind, a message that overrides years of softness and delay. This brings us to the second great truth, auto-suggestion through action. You do not need to sit in silence and chant affirmations to convince your brain that you are disciplined. You need only act. For action is the most powerful suggestion you can ever give to your mind. The moment you perform that habit with decisiveness and energy, you declare not through words, but through behavior, I am disciplined, I am in control, I do what must be done. And that message, sent through your nerves, your breath, your movements, becomes a command written into your subconscious mind. Action is the language the brain understands best. Talk is noise, desire is fleeting. But action, it speaks with thunder. When you move, your brain takes notes. and when you move with repetition, your brain rewires itself to expect that movement, to desire it, and eventually to crave it. That is when discipline becomes automatic, not because you forced it, but because you earned it through repetition of behavior. Do you wish to be a man of immense willpower? Then stop telling yourself so and begin doing so. Every time you perform this habit, you feed your identity as a man of discipline. You engrave that identity deeper into your mind, and the more deeply it is engraved, the harder it becomes to erase. Discipline, then, is not a fight against weakness. It is the replacement of weakness with certainty. Certainty built on action, action that becomes habit, habit that becomes identity, identity that becomes destiny. Your subconscious mind does not argue with your actions. It does not say, "But he didn't feel like it." It observes, records, and obeys. The man who rises and performs the same powerful act every morning teaches his brain a new truth. This is who I am. And because the subconscious mind is always listening, always believing what it sees you do, it will eventually rewrite the internal script. Instead of saying, "I hope I can," it begins to say, "I must," and eventually, "I always do." This is the habit that rewires the brain, not because it is magical, but because it is mechanical. Every time you perform it, you reinforce a groove in your nervous system, a groove that becomes deeper with time, like a river carving its path through stone. The longer you do it, the deeper it gets, and the deeper it gets, the harder it is to deviate from. This is not punishment. This is power. For the man who cannot stop being disciplined is the man who can achieve anything. You may ask, "But what if I fail one day?" The answer is this: do not give your brain the experience of excuse. Do not hand it even one instance of permission to delay, because your subconscious watches everything. If you perform the habit even when tired, even when stressed, even when uninspired, your mind learns that your commands are law. But if you allow exceptions even once, the brain will begin to question you again. It will test your resolve, and the more you excuse, the more your authority weakens. But if you persist, your word becomes unbreakable. And your mind, now convinced, begins to align all thoughts and decisions with your command. This is how discipline is built, not in the chaos of grand intentions, but in the simplicity of one act repeated with consistency. A man who commands his morning commands his mind. A man who commands his mind commands his destiny. This one habit, performed daily without fail, without excuse, rewires the very circuits of who you are. It is the sword that cuts through doubt. It is the torch that burns away hesitation. It is the signal fire that tells every cell in your body, we are no longer slaves to weakness. We are masters of discipline. And once your brain accepts this message, once it believes it, once it integrates it into its fabric, it becomes not only your habit, but your very nature. Repetition is not merely the mother of learning. It is the father of transformation. The mind does not evolve through occasional brilliance, but through the silent, invisible labor of repeated acts. This is the law of mental repetition. What you do consistently, your mind eventually believes, your body begins to reflect, and your character inevitably becomes. A single powerful habit executed daily and without failure lays down the first neural tracks that become highways of discipline. It is not lightning that changes the brain. It is the steady drip, the unwavering hammer of routine that reshapes its structure and dictates its focus. Understand this. Every thought you think and every action you take is a message to your nervous system. Do it once, and it is a whisper. Do it a dozen times, and it becomes a voice. Do it 100 times, and it becomes a commandment your brain will begin to obey without hesitation. That is the miracle of mental repetition. It rewires you from the inside out. The most disciplined men in history were not born with steel minds. They were forged by fire, by doing the same difficult thing so many times that it became easier to do than to avoid. The mind, like a muscle, does not grow stronger from variety. It grows stronger from deliberate and consistent overload. You do not train strength by doing something once and walking away. You train it by returning to the same exercise, the same effort, again and again, until the brain stops resisting and starts adapting. Repetition teaches the brain that this is the new standard, that this act, this behavior, this demand is no longer optional. It is normal. And when discipline becomes normal, success becomes inevitable. The average man seeks novelty, thinking that variety is the secret to fulfillment, but the exceptional man understands that mastery is born of monotony. He does not change the plan when he gets bored. He repeats the plan until it rewrites his wiring. The repetition of a single habit becomes his identity, and identity is more powerful than intention. Intention hopes. Identity acts. Intention wants to change. Identity must continue, because to do otherwise would violate the person you have become. Each time you execute the same action, especially when it is uncomfortable, you are proving to your brain that you are a man of your word. You are training it to obey commands without internal resistance. That is the value of ritual. Ritual is repetition with purpose. It is the deliberate creation of a personal law, a law that you do not break. When you repeat a behavior with intention and consistency, you transform it into a ritual, and once a behavior becomes ritualized, it no longer drains your willpower, it strengthens it. This is the true purpose of repetition, not to occupy time, but to alter your wiring, to replace hesitation with hunger, to turn discomfort into your compass, to teach your mind that pain is not punishment, but the sound of growth. A man who respects repetition does not fear hard things, because he knows that every repetition is a deposit into his destiny. He knows that the pain of repetition is the price of becoming unstoppable. But repetition alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by belief and awareness. If you repeat a habit mindlessly, you build routine without power. But when you repeat it with fire, when you do it knowing that each act is building your empire, you ignite the circuits of greatness within you. Repetition is the engine, awareness is the fuel. When you combine the two, you become a machine of forward motion, no longer swayed by the wind of emotion or the storms of doubt. And now we come to the law that few understand, and even fewer obey, the compounding effect of willpower. You see, willpower is not something you either have or don't. It is something you grow, and like money invested wisely, it compounds. One act of discipline, done today, does not vanish, it multiplies. It makes tomorrow easier, and the next day stronger, and the day after that automatic. You are not merely training behavior, you are multiplying your capacity. Think of willpower like a muscle. If you train it with small, controlled efforts, it grows in size, strength, and resilience. Every time you resist the urge to quit, every time you perform your one habit despite distractions or discomfort, you add weight to your mental barbell. You become stronger not just in action, but in identity. And once your identity shifts to match your actions, it becomes harder not to do the habit than to do it. You reach the point where the idea of skipping feels like betrayal, not to someone else, but to yourself. This compounding of willpower does not announce itself with trumpets. It is silent, subtle, but if you look closely, you'll feel it. You'll notice that where you once hesitated, now you act. Where you once delayed, now you execute. The task that once felt heavy now feels automatic. That is the reward of compounding. It turns giants into ants. It makes the impossible routine. It gives you the edge not just to begin, but to continue and continue again long after others have stopped. You must also know this. Every time you act with discipline, you create a residue of belief. That belief stays with you. It fuels the next act. And as these small victories pile up, your self-trust increases. You no longer hope that you can be consistent. You know it. You no longer try to be focused. You simply are, because you've shown yourself enough evidence that you cannot be shaken. Willpower becomes not an effort, but a reflex. And reflexes are far more powerful than motivation. Most men never reach this point because they quit too soon. They expect reward from repetition before the compounding has kicked in. They fail to understand that willpower must be earned through effort and patience. That the dividends only come to those who persist long enough to collect them. They abandon the process before it has rewritten their system. But the man who stays, who shows up daily, repeats with intention, and respects the silence of the early grind, he becomes unrecognizable to his former self. It is important to see your habit as more than a task. See it as a lever, a tool for compounding your willpower across every part of your life. When you master discipline in one area, the confidence it brings bleeds into others. You begin to eat better, speak better, think better, not because you are trying harder in each area, but because the strength of your willpower has grown. That is the magic of compounding. One small act of discipline unlocks 100 silent shifts across your life. To multiply your willpower, do not chase big wins. Chase small wins done daily. Chase the habit that looks insignificant but builds silently. And as the weeks pass, you will discover that the man you've become no longer needs to push himself as hard as he once did, because the repetition and the compounding have created momentum, and momentum is a force no distraction can stop. Willpower, once grown, becomes self-sustaining. It becomes a furnace that feeds itself. You no longer fight for focus. You live in it. You no longer chase discipline. You walk in it, because you have earned the right to live as the man who no longer negotiates with weakness. And that right was earned not in the noise of grand goals, but in the silence of consistent, unseen repetitions. That is the power of the law of mental repetition and the compounding of willpower. One habit repeated daily multiplies your control, deepens your strength, and elevates your identity until discipline is not something you do. It is who you are. The greatest threat to the modern man is not failure. It is drifting. Drifting is the silent thief of purpose. It wears no mask, makes no announcement, and yet it robs you of time, clarity, and destiny. A man who drifts believes he is thinking, but he is merely reacting. He believes he is living, but he is merely existing. The days pass, the years vanish, and he cannot account for them, for he was present in body but absent in command. This is why one powerful, conscious, unbreakable it is not a suggestion. It is a lifeline. It is the rope that pulls you out of the fog and places your feet on the path of intention. The moment you commit to this habit, you declare war on drifting. You refuse to allow the whims of the world to dictate your direction. You stop waiting for motivation, inspiration, or permission. You rise with decision, and you move with certainty. This habit becomes your compass, fixed, firm, unyielding. You no longer wake up wondering what to do or when to begin. The decision has already been made. The time has already been set. The execution has already been determined, and because of that, you no longer wander. You move. Drifting is born of indecision. It thrives in delay. It feeds on vague intentions and flexible commitments. But the man who has trained himself through one disciplined act, repeated daily, creates a mind that does not waver. He becomes a vessel of purpose. He no longer negotiates with distraction because he has already chosen focus. He no longer chases pleasure because he has found power. The single habit, repeated without excuse, becomes the structure around which all chaos is crushed. Every time you do what you said you would do, especially at the exact moment you said you would do it, you build certainty into your soul. You teach yourself that you are not a slave to feeling, mood, or situation. You are not a victim of circumstances. You are a force, an architect, a creator of routine and results. You become immune to drifting not because you avoid temptation, but because you eliminate the space where it lives. Drifting requires gaps in your time and cracks in your commitment. Discipline seals both. It is not enough to say, "I want to stop drifting." You must replace drifting with direction. That is what this one habit gives you: direction that is clear, consistent, and internal. The world cannot shake a man whose mind is fixed on a task that he performs without fail. While others are chasing dopamine, he is compounding discipline. While others are stuck in indecision, he is reaping the fruit of precision. This habit creates a mental rhythm, and that rhythm drowns out the noise. The beat of progress becomes louder than the voice of distraction. The man who drifts does not know what he is becoming. The man who commits knows exactly who he is building. And he builds not by accident, but by ritual. The habit becomes sacred not because it is glamorous, but because it is grounding. It is the foundation stone of clarity. It tells the brain, here is where we begin, here is what we do, here is who we are. And that internal declaration is stronger than the loudest external distraction. You cannot drift when you are rooted in action. You cannot float aimlessly when your mind is anchored in routine. The habit becomes a lighthouse. It does not move with the storm, it stands through it. When your thoughts begin to wander, the habit brings them back. When your emotions try to hijack your focus, the habit reminds you who is in charge. This is why a single habit, timed, purposeful, unbreakable, is the most powerful antidote to drifting, because it forces you to become present, active, and aligned with a mission every single day. But what is even more remarkable is how this habit transforms your energy. That brings us to the next truth: the transmutation of energy into focus. You are filled with energy every day, mental, emotional, physical, but most of it is misdirected, wasted, or leaked through distraction. A man with no purpose allows his energy to scatter. He wakes up, scrolls through his phone, reacts to everything, and by the time the day demands something meaningful, he is already depleted. But the man who begins with one disciplined habit channels that energy into one place. He focuses it like a beam of light, and that focus becomes his fuel. This is the secret most never understand. Energy without direction leads to chaos, but energy with focus leads to greatness. The habit becomes a conduit. It collects your raw energy, restlessness, anxiety, hunger, ambition, and pours it into something productive. When you act with discipline at the start of your day, you are not just doing a task, you are harnessing power. You are converting emotion into execution. You are taking invisible forces and turning them into visible results. When this habit is done with intensity and consistency, you begin to notice a shift. You begin to feel less overwhelmed. Not because the world has changed, but because your mind is focused. You begin to feel more confident, not because you've eliminated fear, but because you've created evidence, evidence of control, evidence of intention, evidence of progress. The man who has evidence no longer needs motivation. He has momentum. Energy that once leaked through indecision is now captured through action. Focus that once scattered in 10 directions now sharpens in one. You are no longer ruled by the stimuli around you. You are ruled by the standard within you. The habit becomes that standard. It is the fire you light before the world touches your thoughts. And when you light that fire daily, you begin to burn with clarity, purpose, and drive that most will never understand. Transmutation is the art of turning one form into another. This habit is the daily act of turning chaos into clarity. It is the transformation of restlessness into routine, of laziness into leadership, of noise into knowledge. You no longer resist the energy within you. You use it. The tension that once made you anxious now makes you productive. The doubt that once made you freeze now makes you fierce, because you have found the valve that converts pressure into power. This is why this habit must be sacred. It is not just an action. It is alchemy. It turns every form of energy into something useful. Emotional turmoil becomes determination. Mental clutter becomes concentration. physical tension becomes motion. You move not because you're free from distraction, but because you've mastered the channeling of it. The man who learns to transmute his energy becomes unstoppable, not because his days are easy, but because his will is directed. You will see others struggle with procrastination, anxiety, distraction, and delay. You will see them spin in circles, trying to find balance while leaking energy in every direction. But you will not join them because you have built a system that starts with one habit, a habit that captures your energy and points it like an arrow. You do not wait for the day to give you direction. You create it. You do not beg for time or focus. You command it, because the habit has taught you how, and the longer you keep this habit, the more efficient the transmutation becomes. What used to take hours now takes minutes. What used to drain you now drives you. What used to confuse you now clarifies everything. The habit does not just create order. It creates a current of progress that pushes everything forward. You begin to notice that your focus lasts longer, your patience runs deeper, your execution becomes faster, not because you are forcing it, but because you've trained for it. You've trained through the fire of repetition. You've trained through the cold days of no motivation. You've trained through discomfort, delay, and doubt. And now the habit rewards you not just with discipline, but with transformation. Your brain, once wired for avoidance, is now wired for action. Your energy, once scattered by distraction, is now channeled into purpose. And that channel becomes the current that carries you forward, regardless of the weather around you, regardless of the noise, the doubt, or the resistance. The secret to unstoppable discipline lies not in motivation or willpower alone, but in the mastery of one deliberate habit repeated with unwavering commitment. This single act, performed daily, rewires the brain through repetition, builds identity through action, and converts scattered energy into laser, sharp focus. It breaks the chains of drifting, silences the noise of excuses, and creates a mind conditioned for execution. Discipline becomes your nature, not through chance, but through consistent command. Build the habit, protect it, and let it transform you into a force no distraction can shake and no weakness can overtake. This is your path to greatness.